I found out my husband was cheating on me on our 9th wedding anniversary. Not from a text message. Not from a receipt in his pocket. Not from a friend who felt guilty about knowing too long. I found out because I planned a surprise. I had spent 3 weeks organizing it, the restaurant where we had our first real date, a reservation under the name we used as a joke between us, a card I had written 4 drafts of before I got the words right. I left work 2 hours early. I stopped at the florist on 5th Street, the one run by a woman named Rosa who had been making arrangements for our neighborhood for 20 years and who always remembered which flowers I liked. I bought a small bouquet of white ranunculus because they were what I had carried at our wedding and Marcus had always said they looked like something out of a painting. I drove to our house to change before the restaurant. I pulled into the driveway. His car was there. He was supposed to be at a conference in Denver. I sat in my car for a moment with the ranunculus on the passenger seat and the card in my bag and the reservation confirmation on my phone, and I thought, maybe the conference ended early. Maybe he came home to surprise me. Maybe this is the kind of coincidence that becomes a story you tell at dinner parties for the next 20 years. I went inside. I want to tell you what I found, but I also want to tell you something else first, because the what is not the whole story and it is not even the most important part. What I found was what you would expect to find. I do not need to describe it in detail because the detail is not what changed my life. What changed my life was what I did in the 48 hours after, and what I understood about myself in the 18 months after that. But I will tell you this, I stood in the doorway of my own bedroom for what was probably 4 seconds. I did not make a sound. I put the ranunculus down on the hallway table very carefully, because they were not the flowers' fault. And then I left the house, got back in my car, and drove. My name is Sarah. I am 38 years old. I have been a family law paralegal for 11 years, which means I have spent 11 years watching people navigate the dissolution of the thing they thought would last forever, and I want to tell you that not 1 hour of that professional experience prepared me for sitting in a parking lot outside a CVS on our 9th anniversary with white ranunculus on the seat next to me and nowhere specific to go. Let me take you back. Not just to that day, but to the beginning, because the beginning is where the seeds of this were planted, and I did not see them then, and I want you to see them now. I met Marcus when I was 26. He was 29, finishing a law degree he had started late after 3 years working in finance that he said had left him empty in a way he needed to fix. He was at the same study group I attended through a friend, a bar review group that met on Tuesday evenings in a law school conference room and that I attended not because I was studying for the bar but because the friend who invited me was, and she had a way of making things sound more interesting than they turned out to be. Marcus was interesting. He had the kind of intelligence that moved sideways, he made connections other people did not make, found the funny angle on serious things, asked the question underneath the question everyone else was asking. I sat across a seminar table from him for 6 Tuesdays before he asked if I wanted to get coffee. I said yes. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became the kind of relationship that builds slowly and then suddenly, so that one day you look up and realize you have been inside something larger than you understood while you were building it. Marcus was, in those first years, a man who made me feel like the most interesting version of myself. He listened to me the way people listen when they are genuinely curious, and his curiosity was one of the things I loved most about him, the way he would follow a thread in a conversation far beyond where most people would stop, the way he made even ordinary evenings feel like discoveries. We got married when I was 29. His family, a large sprawling family from Georgia with 3 older sisters and a mother who ran the center of gravity for all of them, absorbed me with the warm efficiency of people who were used to welcoming new members and who had decided, on the basis of a single Thanksgiving, that I was someone they wanted to keep. My family was smaller and quieter, my parents, my younger brother Daniel, a handful of cousins I saw at irregular intervals. We were not a family that made noise about things. We sat with things, turned them over, kept our own counsel. Marcus's family thought this was fascinating. His mother said to me once, at the end of that first Thanksgiving, that I was the quietest person she had ever seen listen to a room, and that the people who knew how to listen like that always knew more than anyone expected. She was right. I just didn't know yet what I was going to do with what I knew. The first 7 years of our marriage were, by most visible measures, good. Marcus built a practice. I built my career at the firm. We bought a house in a neighborhood we both loved, an older neighborhood with sidewalks wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side comfortably and trees old enough to give real shade in summer. We talked about children and did not have them yet for reasons that were practical and then became less clearly practical and then became the kind of subject we approached carefully, from angles, without looking directly at it. Looking back, I can see the edges of things I did not see then. The conferences that multiplied. The evenings that ran late. The phone that charged across the room and then one day charged on the nightstand. These things were real and I filed them in the part of myself that noticed things and did not yet know what to do with what it noticed. I worked in family law. I knew what the patterns looked like from the outside. I had sat across from enough people in the early stages of understanding their own marriages to recognize the vocabulary of the situation I was living in. And still I did not name it, because naming it meant it was real and real meant it had to be dealt with and I was not ready to deal with it. I was not ready until the driveway. The ranunculus. His car. The door. After I drove away from the house I went to my friend Ellen's apartment. Ellen had been my closest friend since graduate school. She was a therapist, which is both useful and occasionally exhausting in a best friend, because she has opinions about everything and they are usually accurate. I knocked on her door at 6:30 on a Tuesday evening without calling first, which she understood immediately to mean something serious. She opened the door. She looked at my face. She said, "Come in." I told her what had happened. Not with the detail that came later, in the months of processing, just the facts, the clean outline of them. The conference. The car in the driveway. The door. The ranunculus on the table. Ellen listened. When I finished she said, "What do you need right now?" "Not tomorrow, not next week. Right now." I said I needed to not go home. She said, "Okay. You're staying here." She made tea. We sat on her couch for 3 hours. She did not offer analysis or advice, which is the most impressive thing I have ever seen a therapist do in a personal capacity. She just sat with me while I sat with it, which is exactly what I needed. At 10 o'clock I called Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was careful in the way voices are when they know something has shifted but have not yet confirmed what. I said, "I came home this afternoon." He was quiet. I said, "I won't be home tonight." He said, "Sarah." I said, "Don't. Not tonight." I hung up. He called twice more that night. I did not pick up. He sent 3 texts that I read and did not respond to. The texts were the kind that manage a situation rather than speak to it, careful sentences that confirmed nothing and asked me to talk. I understood, reading them, that he had had the conversation I just initiated before. That he had a vocabulary for it. That he had thought, at some point, about what he would say if this happened. That understanding sat in my chest like something very cold and very still. In the morning I went to work. This sounds wrong, and I know it sounds wrong, but I want to explain why I did it because it mattered for what came next. I went to work because work was where I knew what I was doing. I went to work because the firm was where I had 11 years of competence stored, and I needed to be somewhere I was competent. I went to work because hiding in Ellen's apartment was not a plan, and I was going to need a plan. And because there was something specific at work I needed to do. I am a family law paralegal. I have sat across from enough people at the beginning of enough difficult situations to know exactly what the first practical steps look like. I had drafted enough separation agreements, managed enough financial disclosure documents, organized enough asset inventories to know the process from the inside. I had also, over 11 years, built a professional relationship with every family law attorney in the firm. Not friendships exactly, professional relationships, the kind built on mutual respect and the knowledge of each other's capabilities. The senior partner, a woman named Helen who had been practicing family law for 30 years, had hired me herself and had told me, during a difficult case 4 years ago, that I had the best instincts in the firm for what a case actually needed. I knocked on Helen's door at 9:15. I told her I needed to speak to her personally, not professionally, and that I needed her advice about what a person in my situation should do first. Helen looked at me for a moment. She had the look she gets when she has understood something before you've finished explaining it, which is one of the things that makes her a very good attorney. She said, "Close the door." I closed the door. I sat down. I told her, in the efficient way of someone who works in law and does not need to explain the vocabulary, what had happened and what I thought I was dealing with. She listened. She asked 3 specific questions. Then she said, "Okay. Here's what you do today." She told me to open a personal bank account at a bank that was not our joint bank, immediately, before I did anything else. She told me to photograph or copy every financial document I could access, accounts, investments, tax returns for the past 3 years, any business documents Marcus had at home. She told me to make a list of every joint asset and its approximate value. She told me not to move any money and not to make any dramatic changes and not to tell anyone except a lawyer and Ellen. She said, "And Sarah, you need to decide if you want to try to repair this or if you want to end it, because that decision changes what you do next. You don't have to decide today. But you need to decide before you do the next thing." I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "That's honest. Take the weekend." I took the weekend. I spent it at Ellen's. Marcus came on Saturday morning, stood outside Ellen's building, called my phone from the sidewalk. I watched from the window. I did not go down. He stood there for 20 minutes and then he left, and I understood something about him in those 20 minutes that I had not fully understood before, which was that when the situation became unclear he waited for someone else to set the terms. He had always done this. I had always been the one who set the terms and he had moved toward them. I had thought this was compatibility. I understood now it was a pattern. On Sunday evening I called him. I said, "I need you to not be at the house tomorrow morning. I need to come and get some things." He said, "Sarah. Please. Can we just talk?" I said, "We'll talk. But not yet. I need some time and some space and I need you to give me that without asking me to do it differently." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Okay." I went to the house Monday morning. He was not there. I gathered what Helen had told me to gather, documents, records, the folder of financial papers Marcus kept in the home office in the second desk drawer, the tax returns from the filing cabinet in the closet. I photographed everything I could not take. I put what I was taking in a bag. I also took the card I had written 4 drafts of, which was still in my bag from the anniversary. I took it into the kitchen and I put it on the counter and I looked at it for a moment. Then I threw it away. Not with anger, there was anger, but it was not what I felt looking at the card. What I felt was something quieter and sadder. The grief of having written 4 drafts of something for a person you believed in and then having to throw it away. I took the ranunculus too. They were still on the hallway table where I had left them. They were slightly wilted but not gone. I put them in the car and I drove them to Ellen's and I put them in a vase on her kitchen table because they were still flowers, and flowers had done nothing wrong. The next 3 months were the months of deciding. Marcus and I had 4 conversations during that period. Real ones, not the managed texts, not the checking in that happened around the edges of everything, but actual conversations, sitting across from each other in a coffee shop near his office because neutral ground was the only ground we had. In the first conversation he told me what had happened. How long, who, how it had started, what he had told himself about it. I listened. I asked questions. I did not cry, which surprised me while it was happening and which I understood afterward was not because I was not devastated but because I had moved past the stage where crying was what the situation needed from me. What he described was not the story I would have written for us. But it was the story that had been happening, inside the story I thought was happening, for 2.5 years. 2.5 years. more than a quarter of our marriage. Long enough to have weight, to have changed him in ways I could see only now that I was looking for them. In the second conversation I asked him if he wanted to stay married. He said yes. He said it with what seemed like certainty and what I looked at carefully, the way I look at everything carefully, for the difference between certainty and wanting certainty to be true. I said, why? He said, because I love you. I said, you loved me while this was happening. He said, yes. I said, then what does your loving me mean, Marcus? What does it actually mean, in practice, as a thing that guides what you do? He did not have an answer. Which was, itself, an answer. The third conversation was the one where I told him what I had decided. I had spent 3 months deciding, and the deciding had been the most exhausting thing I had ever done, more exhausting than the discovery, more exhausting than the grief. Because deciding required me to know myself, to know what I could live with and what I couldn't, what I needed and what I was willing to give up to get it, who I was and who I wanted to be. I am a family law paralegal. I have watched people make this decision from both sides. I have watched people who stayed and people who left, and I have watched what happened to both sets of people in the years afterward, and I have understood for a long time that there is no formula, no correct answer, no version of this decision that is right for everyone. The only question is what is right for you. For me, the answer was clear once I stopped being afraid of it. I told him I wanted a divorce. He sat with that for a long time. Then he said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I've been sure for a while. I just needed to be ready to say it." He said, "I don't want to lose you." I said, "I know. But you made choices that meant you might, and they were your choices to make, and this is mine." The fourth conversation was logistical. We were both professionals in law-adjacent fields. We both understood what needed to happen. We agreed to work with a mediator rather than through adversarial attorneys, which was possible because we had no children and our assets, while real, were not complicated. The house. The accounts. The investment portfolio Marcus had built over the years of his practice. 11 years of shared financial life to be divided with the precision that the law requires and the fairness that I was determined we would maintain. Helen supervised my side of it without charging me, which was the most generous professional thing anyone has ever done for me and which I think about every time I do something generous for someone I work with. The divorce was finalized 7 months after the anniversary. I stayed in the house. This was a negotiated outcome that required me to buy out Marcus's share, which I could do because Helen had advised me from the beginning to protect my financial position and I had done so. The house was mine, my name on the mortgage, my name on the deed, my money in the walls and the floors and the kitchen I had chosen piece by piece over 9 years. Marcus moved to an apartment in a neighborhood near his office. He is still practicing law. We have not spoken since the final mediation session, which was 8 months ago, and I do not know if we will speak again, and I have made a kind of peace with not knowing. The woman, her name I know but will not say here, because she is not the center of this story and has her own story she is living, ended things with Marcus, from what I was told by someone who would know, about 3 months after the divorce was finalized. I do not know what Marcus felt about that. I found I did not feel what I expected to feel when I heard it, which was not satisfaction, not vindication, not sorrow for him. What I felt was almost nothing, which I understood was not numbness but completion. The chapter was done and I had already turned the page. Let me tell you about the 18 months after. I stayed in the house. This was the first decision that was entirely mine, not negotiated, not compromised, not shaped around anyone else's needs. My house, my rooms, my hallway table where I had put the ranunculus down. I repainted 3 rooms. Not because they needed painting, they had been painted 2 years before and were fine. But because I needed the rooms to feel like they were mine now, not ours. The color I chose for the bedroom was a deep blue-green that Marcus would not have chosen and that I had loved for years and never used because it felt too bold for a shared space. It is not too bold. It is exactly right. I started running. I had not run since college, when I ran 4 miles every morning before class with the thoughtless ease of someone who has not yet learned to find excuses. I started again at 37 with the deliberate effort of someone who has decided to reclaim something. The first week I ran for 8 minutes before I had to stop. The second week I ran for 12. By month 3 I was running 5 miles on Saturday mornings before the neighborhood woke up, through the streets with the wide sidewalks and the old trees, past the coffee shop where Marcus and I had our third conversation, past the florist where Rosa sold me the ranunculus. Rosa knew. I had not told her, but she knew, the way people who have worked a neighborhood for 20 years know the shapes of the lives around them. She asked after me once, in the careful way of someone who does not want to intrude. I said I was doing well. She looked at me for a moment and then said that I looked well, and that the looking well was the important part. She gave me a small bunch of white ranunculus. She said they were extra. I put them in a vase on my kitchen table. I started seeing a therapist, not Ellen, who was too close to the story and who had, with appropriate professional ethics, told me early on that I should see someone who was not also my best friend. Her name was Dr. Vasquez. She had an office that smelled pleasantly like old paper and good coffee, and she had a way of reflecting things back to me that made me see them differently than I had when I said them. In one of our early sessions she asked me what I had learned about myself in the previous months. I said, that I know how to be still while I'm gathering information. She said, and is that a good quality? I thought about it. I said, it depends on what you do with what you gather. She said, and what did you do with it? I said, I made a decision I could live with. She said, yes. That's what the stillness is for. I think about that often. The stillness is for the decision. Not for avoiding the decision, not for hiding from what needs to be faced, but for gathering what you need to face it clearly. I had been still for too long before the driveway. I had gathered information and not used it because using it meant changing everything, and changing everything was frightening in a way I had not admitted to myself. The driveway forced it. And once it was forced, once I had no more room to file things and wait, I knew exactly what to do. Because I had been preparing, not consciously, not as a plan, but in the way that people who pay attention prepare themselves without knowing they are doing it. I want to tell you about something that happened 8 months into the year after. I was at a restaurant with Ellen, a Saturday evening, the kind of dinner we had been having every few weeks since the separation, the kind that has the relaxed quality of time between people who have known each other long enough to not need to perform. We were talking about something completely unrelated to any of this when a woman sat down at the table next to us. I recognized her. Not personally, I had seen her photograph once, in a context I will not describe, during the months of understanding what had been happening. She did not recognize me. She had no reason to. She sat down with a friend and they talked with the easy animation of close friends having an ordinary evening, and I watched her for a moment with the specific feeling of someone who knows more than the other person knows they know. Ellen had seen my face. She leaned across the table and said, quietly, "Do you want to leave?" I thought about it. I said, "No." I looked at the woman for another moment. She was laughing at something her friend had said. She looked like a person having a normal Saturday evening. She looked like someone who was living her life. I turned back to Ellen. I said, "Tell me what you were saying." And we continued our dinner. That is the moment I think of when I think about where I am now. Not the driveway, not the ranunculus, not the 4 conversations. That moment in the restaurant, when I chose to continue my dinner. I am 38 years old. I live in a house with a bedroom painted blue, green and white ranunculus on the kitchen table when Rosa has extra. I run 5 miles on Saturday mornings. I work in family law, which I am better at than I was before, because I have now been on both sides of the situation I help other people navigate, and that knowledge is real and useful and mine. I am not the same person I was before the anniversary. I do not think returning to the person I was before is the goal, or even possible. The person I am now knows things the person I was before did not know, and some of those things are painful and some of them are clarifying and most of them are both at once. My marriage lasted 9 years. The ranunculus lasted 5 days before I threw them away. The things I kept lasted longer than either. I know who I am. I know what I am capable of. I know what I will accept and what I will not, and the line between those things is clear to me in a way it was not before. That is not a small thing. That is not a small thing at all. I want to tell you one more thing before I finish. Something small that happened last spring that I have not told anyone except Ellen. I was in the backyard on a Saturday morning after my run, the kind of April morning where the light is doing something specific and temporary that you know you should pay attention to before it changes. I was drinking coffee on the back steps and I was thinking about nothing in particular, which is something I have learned to do in the year and a half since everything happened, to sit with the absence of a specific thought and let it be quiet. The garden was starting to come back. It does this every April regardless of who is paying attention to it. The bulbs my mother had helped me plant the first spring after we moved in, 8 years ago, pushing up through the soil with the indifferent persistence of living things. Tulips, mostly. Some daffodils along the fence. I had not tended the garden in the year since the separation. I had watered things when I remembered and ignored them when I didn't and assumed they would manage, which they had, because gardens are more resilient than the people who tend them. I sat on the back steps with my coffee and I looked at the tulips coming up and I thought about the woman who had planted them with her mother 8 years ago, on a spring morning not unlike this one, in a marriage she believed in and a house she was making into something permanent. I did not feel sad about her. I want to tell you that because I think people expect this part of the story to be sad, and it was not sad. It was something more complicated and more interesting than sad. I felt proud of her. Not for anything she accomplished or survived or built, though all of those things are real and worth something. But proud of her for the specific quality she had, that I had forgotten about for a while and then remembered, the quality of knowing how to be still while something is becoming clear. And then, when it was clear, of acting with the wholeness of a person who has been paying attention. I had paid attention. Even when paying attention was painful. Even when what I was noticing was something I was not ready to name. Even when the thing I was gathering information about was the life I had built and loved and believed in. I had paid attention and I had built a file and I had made a decision I could live with and then I had lived with it, every ordinary day. Building back toward myself the way the tulips build back toward the light, not dramatically, not with announcement, just steadily, with the blind certainty of things that know which direction they are supposed to grow. I finished my coffee. I went inside and got my gardening gloves from the closet where I had left them last year. I went back outside and I spent the rest of the morning in the garden. The tulips did not need me. But I needed them. And that, I think, is what the year and a half had taught me more than anything else. Not that I was strong, exactly, strength sounds like it was always there, fully formed, waiting to be called on. It was not always there. I had to find it, and finding it was slow and nonlinear and involved a lot of Tuesday evenings on Ellen's couch and Saturday morning runs that started at 8 minutes and built to 5 miles and one conversation with a restaurant receipt on a sidewalk and one decision made in a coffee shop across from a man I had loved for 9 years. But the finding was mine. No one gave it to me. No one saved me. No one arrived and fixed the thing that had broken. I fixed it. Slowly, on the schedule that it required, in the way that I specifically needed to fix it. And now it is spring again and the tulips are coming up and I have coffee on the back steps and the light is doing the thing it does in April and I am 38 years old and I am, in every way that I can measure, exactly where I am supposed to be. I found out my husband was cheating on me on our 9th wedding anniversary. I went home on a Saturday morning 18 months later and sat in my garden and thought, look what you built from that. Look what you built.